The village of Ravenwood, perched on the edge of civilization, like a bird ready to take flight into the wilderness beyond. Nestled between the sprawling Blackthorn forest and the imposing Carpathian mountains, it was a place where mist clung to rooftops in the morning and shadows stretched long across cobblestone streets by early afternoon. It was here, in a crumbling stone house with a thatched roof perpetually in need of repair, that the Blackwood siblings lived in increasingly desperate circumstances. Eleanor Blackwood sat by the dying fire, her nimble fingers working a needle through a torn shirt. At 19, she was neither the beauty that folktales celebrated nor plain enough to be overlooked. Her features held a quiet intelligence, dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and chestnut hair that fell in waves past her shoulders. What distinguished Eleanor was not her appearance, but her resilience, a quality that had become as necessary as breath since their parents' death the previous winter. The front door burst open, bringing with it a gust of autumn air that made the flames in the hearth sputter. Her brothers, Edmund and William, stomped in, their boots leaving muddy imprints on the worn wooden floor. Eleanor bit back a sigh. She would have to clean that later. "Sister!" Edmund called out, his voice unusually buoyant. At 25, he was the eldest of the Blackwood children, broad-shouldered with a face that might have been handsome if not for the permanent scowl he wore. "We've had a stroke of fortune today." William, barely 22, nodded eagerly. He was leaner than his brother, with the same dark hair as Eleanor, but none of her restraint. "The best kind of fortune," he added, producing a leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. Eleanor set aside her mending. "Where did you get that money?" The question came out sharper than she intended, but months of watching their resources dwindle had left her wary of anything that seemed too good to be true. Edmund's expression darkened. "Why must you always suspect the worst?" "We sold some pelts at the market in Thornfield." It was a plausible explanation. Her brothers occasionally trapped animals in the forest, though their skill at it had never before yielded enough to warrant such excitement. "All of this for a few pelts?" Eleanor gestured toward the pouch. William shifted uncomfortably, exchanging a glance with Edmund that sent a cold sensation crawling up Eleanor's spine. "Not just pelts," Edmund finally said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We made a promise as well." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. "What kind of promise?" Eleanor asked, though something in her already knew the answer would bring no comfort. Edmund cleared his throat. "Do you recall the stories about Castle Blackcrag?" Everyone in Ravenwood knew of Blackcrag. The ancient fortress loomed on the highest peak of the Carpathian Range, visible on clear days as a jagged silhouette against the sky. For as long as anyone could remember, it had been the domain of Lord Dracula, a nobleman so reclusive that many believed him to be nothing more than a myth, or something far worse than human. What of it? Eleanor's fingers tightened around the fabric in her lap. "Lord Dracula has sent emissaries to the surrounding villages," William explained, his words tumbling out in a rush. "He seeks a bride." Eleanor's laugh was hollow. "And what has that to do with us?" "He's offering a fortune to the family of the chosen woman," Edmund continued, refusing to meet her gaze. "Enough gold to live comfortably for generations." The realization of what her brothers had done hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. "You didn't," she whispered, rising from her chair. The shirt she had been mending fell forgotten to the floor. "Tell me you didn't." William at least had the decency to look ashamed. "We had no choice, Ellie. The taxes are due at month's end, and the harvest was poor. We'll lose everything if we can't pay." "So you sold me instead?" The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "To a man no one has seen in living memory? A man rumored to be a monster?" Edmund's jaw tightened. "They're just stories to frighten children. Lord Dracula is merely a reclusive nobleman, and the arrangement is advantageous. You'll be a lady, with servants and fine clothes. It's more than you could ever hope for as a woodcutter's daughter." Eleanor felt her world tilting, the familiar walls of their humble home suddenly alien. "When?" she managed to ask, her voice barely audible. "His carriage arrives tomorrow at nightfall," Edmund replied, setting the pouch of coins on the table with a finality that made Eleanor's heart sink. "Pack only what you can carry." Sleep eluded Eleanor that night. She lay awake in the small bed she had occupied since childhood, listening to the wind whistling through cracks in the walls and her brother's snores from the adjacent room. Outside, an owl hooted mournfully, the sound perfectly matching her despair. She had considered running away, disappearing into the blackthorn forest where her brothers might never find her. But where would she go? Winter approached, and a woman alone had few prospects beyond starvation or a fate worse than the one her brothers had arranged for her. By morning, resignation had settled over Eleanor like frost. She rose before dawn and went about her chores mechanically, feeding the chickens, drawing water from the well, sweeping the floor clean of her brother's muddy footprints. Each familiar task felt like a goodbye. In the afternoon, she bathed in water heated over the fire and dressed in her best gown, a faded blue dress that had once belonged to her mother. It was outdated and slightly too large, but it was the finest garment she owned. Eleanor twisted her hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck and pinched her cheeks to bring color to her pale face. When she emerged from her room, Edmund nodded approvingly. "You look presentable," he said, as if she were being interviewed for a position as a housemaid rather than handed over to an unknown nobleman. "Will you at least accompany me to Castle Blackcrag?" Eleanor asked, hating the tremor in her voice. William shook his head. "The emissary was clear. Lord Dracula's carriage will take you alone." As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Ravenwood, a sound unlike any Eleanor had heard before echoed through the village. The clatter of hooves on cobblestones, accompanied by the creak of wheels and the jangle of harnesses. But there was something unnatural about the rhythm, too swift and too silent between the sounds. Edmund opened the door, and Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Outside stood a carriage unlike any she had ever seen. It was fashioned of dark wood that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the dying light, with intricate carvings that twisted like living things along its surface. Two horses as black as midnight stood in harness, their breath coming in plumes of steam despite the mild evening air. Most unsettling of all was the driver, a figure shrouded entirely in a hooded cloak, face invisible within its depths. He neither spoke nor moved as Edmund guided Eleanor to the carriage door. "Remember your manners," her eldest brother instructed, his voice betraying a hint of uncertainty for the first time. "Be grateful for the opportunity Lord Dracula has provided." William pressed a small cloth bundle into her hands. Food for the journey, a pitiful gesture that did nothing to ease the betrayal Eleanor felt. As she stepped into the carriage, Eleanor turned back one last time to look at the only home she had ever known. Her brothers stood framed in the doorway, Edmund straight-backed and resolute, William fidgeting with the edge of his shirt. Neither moved to wave goodbye. The interior of the carriage was lined with velvet so dark it seemed to swallow the last remnants of daylight. Eleanor settled onto the seat, her bundle clutched tightly to her chest. Without warning, the carriage lurched forward, beginning its journey toward Castle Blackcrag. Through the small window, Eleanor watched as Ravenwood fell away behind them. The carriage moved with unnatural speed, the forests and fields blurring past, as if they travelled on the wings of some great bird rather than pulled by horses. Night fell completely, and still they climbed higher into the mountains. The temperature dropped, and Eleanor pulled her thin cloak tighter around her shoulders. The moon rose, full and luminous, illuminating a landscape increasingly barren and forbidding. Just when Eleanor thought she could endure no more of the cold and fear, the carriage crested a ridge, and Castle Blackcrag appeared before her. In the moonlight, it was both more magnificent and more terrifying than she had imagined, a sprawling edifice of black stone, with towers that speared the night sky like accusing fingers. No lights burned in its countless windows, yet it did not appear abandoned. Rather, it seemed to wait, patient and alive. The carriage passed through massive iron gates that opened silently at their approach and followed a winding path to the castle's entrance. When it finally came to a halt, Eleanor found herself unable to move, paralyzed by dread of what or who awaited her inside. The carriage door opened of its own accord. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor stepped out onto the smooth stone of the courtyard. The air here smelled different, crisp with mountain cold, but tinged with something else, something like old books and dried roses. The great doors of Castle Blackcrag swung open, spilling golden light onto the steps. Silhouetted in that light stood a tall figure. "Welcome to Blackcrag, Miss Blackwood," came a voice, deep and melodious, with an accent Eleanor couldn't place. "I've been waiting for you." Lord Dracula stepped forward into the moonlight, and Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. The stories had not prepared her for the reality of the man, or whatever he was. He appeared no older than 30, with features so perfectly formed they seemed sculpted rather than born. His hair was as black as the night sky, contrasting sharply with skin pale as moonlight. But it was his eyes that held her transfixed, dark as the spaces between stars, yet glimmering with an inner light that spoke of centuries of knowledge. He moved toward her with inhuman grace, closing the distance between them in what seemed both an eternity and an instant. Up close, Eleanor could see that his lips were the color of wine, his cheekbones high and sharp enough to cut glass. "My lord," she managed, dropping into a curtsy that felt woefully inadequate. A smile curved those wine-dark lips, revealing teeth that were white and perfect, and yes, just slightly too sharp at the canines. "There is no need for such formalities between us, Eleanor," he said, offering his hand. It was long-fingered and elegant, adorned with a single ring of black stone. "After all, you are to be my queen." Eleanor's heart stuttered in her chest. Not his bride, but his queen. The distinction seemed significant, though she could not say why. As Lord Dracula's cool fingers closed around hers, Eleanor felt a strange sensation, not fear, though that was certainly present, but something else. A recognition, perhaps, as if some part of her had been waiting for this moment, without her knowledge. "Come," he said, leading her toward the open doors. "The night grows cold, and there is much to discuss." Eleanor hesitated only briefly before allowing herself to be guided into Castle Blackcrag. As the doors closed behind them with a sound like the final beat of a heart, she could not help but feel that she had crossed a threshold from which there would be no return. What she did not yet understand was whether she walked toward her doom, or toward a destiny greater and more terrible than anything her brothers could have imagined when they traded her to the Vampire King. The interior of Castle Blackcrag unfolded before Eleanor like a dark blossom. Vaulted ceilings stretched upward into shadow, while intricately woven tapestries depicting ancient battles and forgotten myths adorned the walls. Candelabras cast pools of golden light that did little to dispel the darkness, pressing in from all sides. Lord Dracula's hand remained at the small of her back, a presence both comforting and unsettling, as he guided her through corridors that seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when she wasn't looking directly at them. Eleanor's mind struggled to map their path, but each turn led to chambers more opulent than the last, disorienting her sense of direction. "You must be weary from your journey," he said, his voice like velvet against her ears. "I've had chambers prepared for you." Eleanor summoned her courage. "My lord, I would know the terms of this arrangement before anything else." He paused, turning to face her with an expression of mild surprise that quickly transformed into approval. "Direct and forthright. I admire that." His dark eyes studied her face with unnerving intensity. "Your brothers traded you for gold, believing you would become my bride." Eleanor flinched at the blunt assessment of her situation, but Lord Dracula continued, "What they do not understand is that I seek not merely a bride, but a companion, someone with whom to share eternity." He gestured toward a portrait hanging on the wall beside them, a painting Eleanor had not noticed a moment before. The woman in the portrait bore a startling resemblance to Eleanor herself, the same chestnut hair, the same contemplative eyes. But she was dressed in finery Eleanor could scarcely imagine, her neck adorned with jewels that caught the light with hypnotic brilliance. "Elisabetta," Lord Dracula said, a note of ancient sorrow colouring his voice. "My wife. 5 centuries ago." Eleanor's mouth went dry. 5 centuries? "You do not seem surprised by the implication of my age," he observed, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "The villagers whisper stories," Eleanor replied cautiously. "They say you are not entirely human." "And what do you believe, Eleanor Blackwood?" She met his gaze steadily, despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I believe you are something beyond my understanding. Whether that makes you a monster or merely different, I cannot yet say." Lord Dracula laughed, a sound like distant thunder. "Wisely answered. Come, we shall dine together, and perhaps you will begin to form your judgment." He led her to a dining hall, where a table stretching the length of the room was set for 2, one place at each end. Candles floated in the air above the table, defying all natural laws. Eleanor blinked, certain her exhaustion was causing her to hallucinate. "The candles?" she whispered. Magic permeates every corner of Blackcrag," Lord Dracula explained, pulling out her chair. "You will grow accustomed to it in time." As Eleanor took her seat, servants emerged from the shadows to serve them. They moved with the same unnatural grace as their master, their faces pale and expressionless. None spoke, and Eleanor noticed they avoided meeting her gaze. The food before her was more extravagant than anything she had ever seen: roasted meats, exotic fruits, and wines so dark they appeared black in the candlelight. Lord Dracula, however, took nothing but a single goblet filled with a liquid too thick and crimson to be wine. "You do not eat?" Eleanor asked, though she already suspected the answer. "I sustain myself through other means," he replied, raising the goblet in a toast. "But please, enjoy. The journey has been long, and you require nourishment." Eleanor hesitated before taking a small bite of bread. It melted on her tongue, more delicious than seemed possible. Despite her apprehension, hunger won out, and she found herself eating with increasing enthusiasm. As she ate, Lord Dracula spoke of Blackcrag's history, of the mountains that surrounded them, and of the lands beyond that he had travelled in centuries past. His voice wove a tapestry of words that transported Eleanor to places she had only dreamed of, describing colours she had never seen and music she had never heard. "And now I find myself curious about you, Eleanor Blackwood," he said at last, leaning forward. "Tell me of your life before this night." Eleanor hesitated, uncertain what aspects of her mundane existence could possibly interest a being who had lived for centuries. "There is little to tell. I was born in Ravenwood, the daughter of a woodcutter. When my parents died of fever last winter, I took charge of our household. My days were filled with ordinary tasks: cooking, cleaning, mending. Yet I sense there is more to you than these humble duties suggest," he pressed gently. Something in his tone encouraged honesty. "I taught myself to read," she admitted. "Our village priest had a small collection of books he allowed me to borrow. I read them all, again and again, imagining worlds beyond our forest." "A mind that hungers for knowledge," Lord Dracula observed, seeming pleased. "That is a quality I value greatly." He rose from his chair with fluid grace. "Come, there is something I wish to show you." He led her through more twisting corridors until they reached a pair of towering doors carved with intricate symbols. With a wave of his hand, the doors swung open, revealing what could only be described as a cathedral of knowledge. Bookshelves rose from floor to ceiling, extending farther than Eleanor could see in the dim light. Spiral staircases connected multiple levels, while reading nooks furnished with plush chairs were scattered throughout. Globes of soft blue light hovered near the shelves, illuminating titles in languages Eleanor had never seen. "My library," Lord Dracula said, watching her reaction closely, "collected over centuries from every corner of the world. Some of these volumes are the only copies that remain in existence." Eleanor stepped forward in wonder, her fingers trailing along leather-bound spines. "This is magnificent," she breathed. "It is yours to explore whenever you wish," he told her. "Knowledge should never be hoarded, only shared with those who appreciate its value." For the first time since leaving Ravenwood, Eleanor felt something other than fear, a spark of curiosity, perhaps even excitement. "Thank you, my lord." "Vlad," he corrected her. "When we are alone, I would have you call me Vlad." The intimacy of the request sent a shiver through her. Before she could respond, a distant clock chimed midnight, the sound reverberating through the castle walls. "Dawn approaches faster than I would like," Lord Dracula Vlad said with a note of regret. "I must retire soon. Allow me to show you to your chambers." He guided her to a suite of rooms more luxurious than Eleanor could have imagined. A four-poster bed dominated the bedchamber, draped in midnight blue velvet. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on walls covered in silver-embossed paper. A wardrobe stood open, revealing dresses of every color and fabric, all appearing to be precisely her size. "These are all for me?" she asked incredulously. "Of course," he replied. "You will find everything you need here. My servants will attend you during daylight hours when I must rest." Something shifted in his expression then, a darkness passing over his features like a cloud obscuring the moon. "There is one rule you must observe without exception, Eleanor. You may explore the castle freely, but you must never enter the East Wing. It is forbidden to you." The warning sent a chill through her. "What is in the East Wing?" "Things not meant for mortal eyes," he answered, his tone brooking no further questions. "Do I have your word that you will obey this one restriction?" Eleanor nodded slowly. "You have my word." "Good." His expression softened. "Rest well, Eleanor. Tomorrow night we shall become better acquainted." With that he bowed slightly and left her alone, the door closing silently behind him. Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind whirling with all she had seen and heard. Part of her remained terrified of what her future might hold in this strange castle with its immortal master. Yet another part, a part she scarcely recognized, felt a curious thrill at the mysteries surrounding her. She changed into a nightgown of soft silk, left folded on a chair, then climbed into the bed. Despite her expectation that sleep would elude her, exhaustion claimed her almost immediately. Her dreams were vivid and unsettling, visions of running through endless corridors, of a woman who looked like her weeping tears of blood, of Vlad standing atop a battlefield strewn with bodies while lightning split the sky behind him. She awoke with a gasp as the first light of dawn crept through a gap in the heavy curtains. A soft knock at the door startled her further. "Enter," she called, pulling the blankets up to her chin. A young woman with pale blonde hair stepped into the room carrying a breakfast tray. Unlike the servants from the previous night, she appeared more human, though her movements still held that same ethereal quality. "Good morning, miss," she said, placing the tray on a nearby table. "I am Lilith, assigned to attend to your needs during daylight hours." Eleanor slipped from the bed, wrapping herself in a robe that had been laid out for her. "Thank you, Lilith. May I ask you something?" The servant's expression remained carefully neutral. "If it is within my power to answer." "What exactly is Lord Dracula? I mean," Eleanor struggled to frame her question delicately. "The villagers say he is a vampire, a drinker of blood." "Is that true?" Lilith's eyes darted nervously to the door. "The master is what he is," she replied cryptically. "It is not my place to discuss his nature, but I will say this. He has treated me with more kindness than any human master I served before coming to Blackcrag. Are you not afraid of him?" A faint smile touched Lilith's lips. "There are things in this castle far more terrifying than the master." She straightened abruptly, as if she'd said too much. "Your bath is prepared in the adjoining chamber. Will you require assistance with dressing afterward?" Eleanor shook her head, recognizing the change of subject for what it was. "No, thank you. I can manage." After bathing in water scented with rose petals, Eleanor selected the simplest of the dresses from the wardrobe, a gown of forest green that reminded her of the woods near Ravenwood. As she fastened the final button, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The woman staring back at her looked like a lady, not a woodcutter's daughter. Strengthened by this transformation, Eleanor decided to explore the castle. She would keep her promise to avoid the East Wing, but the rest of Black Crag was open to her, and she intended to learn as much as she could about her new home and its master. The castle revealed itself slowly throughout the day, offering glimpses of its secrets like a reluctant lover. Eleanor discovered rooms filled with treasures from distant lands, jade carvings from China, golden masks from Peru, intricate puzzles from Arabia. One chamber contained nothing but musical instruments, some of which she could not name. Another held maps covering every wall, charting not only the known world, but places that seemed to exist only in legend. By late afternoon, Eleanor found herself drawn back to the library. She selected a volume bound in red leather, settling into a comfortable chair near a window that overlooked the mountains. The book contained folk tales from countries she had never heard of, stories of creatures that defied comprehension and heroes who faced impossible odds. She became so engrossed that she failed to notice the setting sun until shadows lengthened across the pages. A prickling sensation at the back of her neck made her look up. Lord Dracula, Vlad, stood watching her from the doorway. "You seem at home among the books," he observed, moving toward her with that inhuman grace. Eleanor closed the volume carefully. "They offer windows into other worlds." "Indeed they do." He extended his hand. "Would you walk with me in the gardens? The night is particularly beautiful." The gardens of Castle Black Crag were unlike any Eleanor had seen before. Plants that should not have survived in the mountain climate flourished here. Exotic flowers that bloomed only at night, releasing heady perfumes into the air. Stone paths wound through carefully tended beds, leading to fountains where water flowed upward instead of down. "How is this possible?" Eleanor asked, gesturing to a tree bearing fruit that glowed within a light. "Nothing should grow at this altitude, especially not such strange specimens. The castle exists partially beyond the normal world," Vlad explained, plucking one of the luminescent fruits and offering it to her. "The boundaries between realms are thin here, allowing things to flourish that would wither elsewhere." Eleanor hesitated before taking a bite. The fruit tasted of honey and starlight, if such a thing were possible. "Realms? You speak as if other worlds exist alongside our own." "They do." His eyes reflected the glowing fruit like twin moons. "Reality is more complex than most humans perceive. There are layers upon layers, dimensions folded within dimensions." As they walked, Vlad told her stories of these other realms, places where time flowed backward, where thoughts took physical form, where beings of pure energy danced through endless skies. Eleanor listened, entranced, uncertain whether to believe him yet unable to dismiss his words entirely. They came to a stone bench overlooking a pond where fish with scales like polished silver swam in complex patterns. As they sat, Vlad turned to face her directly. "I have shown you wonders, Eleanor, but I have not yet been entirely forthright about why you are here." Eleanor's heart quickened. "I assumed it was because I resemble your long-dead wife. That is part of the reason," he acknowledged, "but not the whole of it. There is something in your blood, a rare quality that appears once in many generations. I sensed it the moment your brothers spoke your name to my emissary." "My blood," Eleanor repeated, suddenly aware of the pulse beating in her throat. "What do you mean?" Vlad's expression grew solemn. "You carry within you the potential for transformation beyond anything you can imagine. Your presence in this castle is no accident, nor is it merely the result of your brother's greed. You were destined to come here." Before Eleanor could question him further, a piercing scream echoed through the garden. She leapt to her feet as Vlad's posture changed, tension radiating from his body like heat from a flame. "Stay behind me," he commanded, all trace of the cultured host vanishing as he moved with blinding speed toward the source of the sound. Eleanor followed despite his instruction, gathering her skirts to hurry after him. They rounded a hedge to find Lilith sprawled on the ground, blood seeping from a wound in her shoulder. Standing over her was a creature that defied description, part wolf, part bat, with eyes that burned like coals in a gaunt, elongated face. "A fetch!" Vlad snarled, placing himself between the creature and Eleanor. "How did it breach the boundaries?" The creature hissed words in a language Eleanor did not understand, its gaze fixed not on Vlad, but on her. A sense of wrongness emanated from it, as if its very existence violated the natural order. Vlad spoke a word that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality, making the air ripple around them. The fetch shrieked, its body contorting unnaturally. In a blur of movement too swift for Eleanor's eyes to follow, Vlad was upon it. His hands transformed into claws that slashed through the creature's flesh. The battle was brief, but vicious. When it ended, the fetch lay motionless on the ground, its body already dissolving into a viscous black fluid that sank into the earth. Vlad stood over it, his elegant clothes torn, his chest heaving with unnecessary breath. A human affectation, Eleanor realized, that he maintained even in moments of stress. He turned to her and Eleanor gasped. His eyes blazed crimson, his features sharpened to predatory angles, and his mouth was filled with teeth like needles, far more terrifying than the subtle elongation of canines she had glimpsed before. As she watched, he mastered himself, his face returning to its human appearance through visible effort. "Are you harmed?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. Eleanor shook her head, then rushed to Lilith's side. The servant moaned softly, the wound in her shoulder pulsing with each beat of her heart. "She needs help," Eleanor said urgently. "Can you heal her?" Vlad knelt beside them, examining the wound with a frown. "The fetch's claws carry poison. I can slow its progress, but curing her will require ingredients from—" He hesitated, meeting Eleanor's eyes. "From the East Wing." "Then we must go there immediately," Eleanor insisted. "You cannot accompany me," Vlad said firmly. "What dwells there would overwhelm your mortal senses. But I cannot leave you unprotected, not now that the fetches have found a way into Blackcrag." He appeared to wrestle with a decision. "There is a chamber beneath the library, a sanctuary warded against all intrusion. You will be safe there until I return." Eleanor wanted to argue but recognized the urgency of their situation. "Very well, but please hurry for Lilith's sake." Vlad lifted the injured servant as if she weighed nothing, and together they made their way swiftly back through the gardens. The castle itself seemed to respond to its master's distress, corridors shortening, doors appearing where none had been before, allowing them to reach the library in minutes rather than the hour it had taken Eleanor earlier. In the center of the library floor, Vlad pressed his hand against a seemingly ordinary section of marble. A seam appeared, widening into a spiral staircase that descended into darkness. "Follow this to the bottom," he instructed. "The door will seal behind you. Do not attempt to leave until I return for you, no matter what you may hear. Do you understand?" Eleanor nodded, casting a worried glance at Lilith's increasingly pale face. "I understand. Please, save her." "I shall do my utmost," Vlad promised. "Now go, quickly." Eleanor gathered her skirts and began descending the stairs. The darkness below was absolute, but as she took each step, small lights illuminated in the walls, providing just enough glow to see by. Behind her, she heard the sound of stone grinding against stone as the entrance sealed itself. At the bottom of the staircase, Eleanor found a circular chamber unlike any other room in the castle. The walls were lined with shelves containing not books, but objects of strange and varied design. Crystal spheres, metal contraptions, vials filled with liquids of impossible colors. At the center stood a pedestal supporting a large book bound in what appeared to be silver. Curious, despite her worry for Lilith, Eleanor approached the book. Its cover bore no title, only an intricate symbol that seemed to shift and change as she looked at it. When she reached out to touch it, the symbol flared with blue light and the book fell open of its own accord. The pages were filled with writing in a script Eleanor had never seen before, yet as she stared at the strange characters, they began to transform, rearranging themselves into words she could understand. The text described Castle Blackcrag not as a mere building, but as a living entity, a nexus point between multiple realms. It spoke of the bloodline of Dracula, not vampires as legend portrayed them, but guardians of the boundaries between worlds. And there, on a page that seemed to glow more brightly than the others, Eleanor found a passage that made her blood run cold. Once in a millennium, a mortal woman is born whose blood holds the key to unlocking the final gate. Should she willingly surrender her mortality to the Guardian, the worlds will be forever sealed from one another. Should she refuse, the barriers will crumble entirely, allowing the outer beings to enter our realm and devour all life within it. Eleanor's hands trembled as she turned to the next page, which contained an illustration of a woman who could have been her twin, standing between Vlad and a towering darkness filled with countless eyes and grasping limbs. Beneath the image was written, "The chosen must make her choice at the moment of perfect eclipse, when the moon's shadow devours the sun. Neither coercion nor deception may influence her decision, for only a choice freely made will bind the spell." A distant rumbling shook dust from the ceiling, interrupting Eleanor's reading. The lights along the stairwell flickered ominously. Something was happening above, something violent enough to be felt even in this protected chamber. Eleanor closed the book, her mind racing. She was not merely a bride selected for her resemblance to a long-dead love. She was the chosen, apparently destined to make a sacrifice that would determine the fate of all worlds. But what exactly would that sacrifice entail? And could she trust Vlad to tell her the truth about it? The rumbling intensified, and Eleanor heard what sounded like distant screams. Despite Vlad's warning to remain in the sanctuary, she found herself drawn toward the stairs. If Lilith and others were in danger, how could she hide safely below? As she placed her foot on the first step upward, a new sound reached her. A voice calling her name, not from above but from behind her, from deeper within the sanctuary where no doorway had been visible. The voice was female, familiar yet strange, filled with desperation. "Eleanor," it called again, "please, help me." Eleanor turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Where solid wall had been moments before, an archway now stood, leading into impenetrable darkness. And from that darkness, a pair of eyes identical to her own stared back at her with a mixture of hope and terror. "Who are you?" Eleanor whispered, taking an involuntary step forward. The figure in the darkness stretched out a hand. "Someone who knows what Dracula truly intends for you. Come with me now, before he returns, if you wish to know the truth." Eleanor hesitated at the threshold, torn between fear of the unknown and the mounting certainty that Vlad had not told her everything about her purpose at Castle Blackcrag. Above her, the sounds of conflict grew louder. Below her, the sanctuary waited, promising answers but threatening further mysteries. With a deep breath, Eleanor made her choice and stepped through the archway into darkness. As Eleanor stepped through the archway, the darkness enveloped her like velvet, cool and disorienting. For a moment she felt weightless, as if falling through a vast emptiness. Then her feet touched solid ground, and light bloomed around her. Not the warm glow of candles, but a cold, blue-white radiance that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. She stood in a circular chamber that mirrored the sanctuary she had just left, but everything here was inverted. Where the other room had felt protective and warm, this space radiated an ancient coldness. And there, standing before her, was herself. No, not quite herself. The woman wore Eleanor's face like a familiar mask, but subtle differences marked her as other. hair a shade darker, eyes holding centuries of knowledge, skin so pale it was nearly translucent. She wore a gown of midnight blue that seemed to shift and flow like liquid shadow. "You came," the woman said, her voice an echo of Eleanor's own. "I feared you might not trust me enough." Eleanor's hand instinctively reached for the silver cross she had worn since childhood, only to remember that she had removed it before bathing that morning. "Who are you? Why do you wear my face?" The woman's lips curved in a sad smile. "Or perhaps you wear mine. I am Elisabetta, or what remains of her. Vlad's wife." Eleanor stepped back in shock. "But you died centuries ago." Death is rarely as final as mortals believe, especially within Black Crag's walls. Elisabetta gestured around them. "This chamber exists between life and death, between worlds. I have been trapped here for 500 years, neither truly alive nor fully departed." A tremendous crash reverberated through the castle, making dust rain from the ceiling. Elisabetta looked up with alarm. "The fetches grow bolder. We have little time." She fixed Eleanor with an intense gaze. "Tell me, what has Vlad revealed about your purpose here?" Eleanor hesitated, uncertain how much to trust this spectral version of herself. "He spoke of my blood containing some rare quality. The book in the sanctuary mentioned a chosen one who must make a sacrifice during an eclipse. Did it speak of what that sacrifice entails?" When Eleanor shook her head, Elisabetta's expression darkened. "Of course not. Vlad would keep that hidden until the last moment." She moved closer, her form seeming to flicker at the edges like a candle flame in a draught. "The ritual requires the chosen's complete surrender, not just of mortality, but of will, of identity, of soul. You would cease to exist as Eleanor Blackwood. Your essence would merge with mine, creating a being with the power to seal the boundaries between worlds permanently." "Merge?" Eleanor felt suddenly cold. "You mean my consciousness would disappear? Worse than death," Elisabetta confirmed grimly. "At least in death, something of you continues. This ritual would erase everything that makes you who you are." Another crash, closer this time. The walls themselves seemed to tremble. "But if I refuse," Eleanor said slowly, recalling the book's warning, "the barriers between worlds will collapse entirely. Countless lives would be lost." Elisabetta's gaze softened with sympathy. "That is the choice Vlad intends to force upon you. Sacrifice yourself completely or condemn the world. But there is another way." She moved to a pedestal Eleanor hadn't noticed before, upon which rested a dagger with a crystal blade that caught the blue light and fractured it into rainbow patterns. "This was forged in the space between realms. With it, you can sever the bonds that tie me to this half-existence. Free me, and I can take your place in the ritual." "You would sacrifice yourself?" Eleanor asked, suspicious. "Why?" "I have lingered too long in this twilight state," Elisabetta replied, a weariness in her voice that spoke of centuries of isolation. "Neither truly alive nor permitted the peace of death. Release would be a mercy." "Ender," her voice caught. "Despite everything, I still love him. I would spare him the burden of your destruction." Eleanor studied the dagger, torn between hope and doubt. "How do I know this isn't a trick? That freeing you won't cause more harm?" "You don't," Elisabetta admitted. "Faith requires a leap into darkness. But ask yourself, has Vlad been forthcoming about his plans for you? About what truly dwells in the East Wing? About why Fetches suddenly breach his defenses now, after centuries of security?" Before Eleanor could respond, a new sound pierced the air, a high, keening wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Elisabetta's form flickered violently. "He knows you're here," she gasped. "The eclipse begins tomorrow at midday. You must decide before then. Take the dagger. Keep it hidden. If you choose to help me, return here before the moon touches the sun." She pressed the crystal dagger into Eleanor's hand. The moment it touched her skin, the chamber began to dissolve around them, the blue light fading into darkness. "How do I find my way back?" Eleanor asked urgently. "The dagger will guide you," Elisabetta whispered as her form grew transparent. It knows the way between worlds. Eleanor felt herself falling backward through darkness once more. When the sensation stopped, she found herself standing at the base of the staircase in the original sanctuary, the crystal dagger clutched in her hand. Its weight felt significant against her palm, both heavier and lighter than it should be. With trembling fingers, she concealed the weapon in the folds of her skirt, just as the stone door at the top of the stairs began to grind open. Vlad descended, his clothing torn and stained with what looked like black ichor. Despite his disheveled appearance, he moved with the same preternatural grace, his eyes seeking her out immediately. "You're safe," he said, relief evident in his voice. The fetches breached further into the castle than ever before. They seemed drawn to something. His gaze sharpened, studying her with sudden intensity. "Did anything unusual occur while I was gone?" Eleanor forced her expression to remain neutral, grateful for years of practice hiding her thoughts from her brother's scrutiny. "No. I explored the sanctuary a bit. The book on the pedestal opened for me, but I couldn't understand much of what it contained. It wasn't entirely a lie, which made it easier to deliver convincingly. Still, she felt Vlad's eyes searching her face, looking for signs of deception. After a long moment, he seemed satisfied. "Lilith will recover. The poison was extracted in time, though she will need several days to regain her strength." "I'm glad," Eleanor said, genuinely relieved. "What were those creatures? Why did they attack now?" Vlad offered his hand to help her up the stairs. "Fetches are servants of the outer beings, entities that exist beyond the boundaries of our reality. They seek entry to our world, and as the time of eclipse approaches, the barriers naturally thin." "And what happens during the eclipse?" Eleanor asked, carefully monitoring her tone to sound merely curious rather than knowing. A shadow passed over Vlad's features. "We must perform a ritual to strengthen the boundaries. Your presence is essential to its success." He paused at the top of the stairs, turning to face her. "I had hoped for more time to explain everything, to allow you to adjust to the truth of your situation, but after tonight's attack, I fear we cannot delay." He led her not back to her chambers but deeper into the castle, toward a wing she had not yet explored. "There are things you must know, preparations that must be made before tomorrow's eclipse." Eleanor followed, acutely aware of the dagger concealed in her skirt and the weight of the choice before her. As they walked, she noticed subtle changes in the castle's architecture, the corridors growing wider, the ceilings higher, the decorations shifting from Gothic opulence to something older and more primal. Symbols she didn't recognize were carved into the stone walls, pulsing faintly with inner light. "We are approaching the East Wing," Vlad said, noting her attention to the changing surroundings. "The forbidden area. Given what is coming, you must now see what dwells there." Eleanor's heart raced as they approached a set of massive doors, carved from what appeared to be a single piece of obsidian. The surface was etched with the same shifting symbol she had seen on the book in the sanctuary. "Behind these doors lies the truth of Blackcrag's purpose," Vlad said solemnly. "Once you see, there is no returning to ignorance." "Are you prepared for that, Eleanor?" She met his gaze steadily. "I am." With a gesture from Vlad, the obsidian doors swung open silently, revealing a vast chamber beyond. Eleanor stepped forward and felt her breath catch in her throat. The East Wing was not a wing at all, but a single enormous room with a domed ceiling that seemed to open directly onto the night sky. Except the stars visible through it were arranged in patterns Eleanor had never seen, moving in ways that defied natural laws. The floor was a perfect circle of polished black stone, at the center of which stood a raised dais. But what drew Eleanor's gaze and sent ice through her veins was what surrounded the dais, a shimmering, undulating barrier of energy that contained something, a darkness deeper than night, a void that twisted and churned like living shadow. Within it, she glimpsed fragments of impossible geometries, flashes of eyes that should not exist, hints of appendages that followed no biological logic. What you see is a small portion of what we call the void, Vlad explained, his voice grave. A tear in reality, held in check by ancient magic. Through it, the outer beings watch and wait, seeking entry to our world. Eleanor fought against the vertigo that threatened to overwhelm her as she stared into the contained chaos. This has been here all along, beneath the castle. The castle was built around it, Vlad corrected, by my ancestors, who discovered the tear and swore to protect the world from what lies beyond. For millennia, we have maintained the barriers, strengthening them during each eclipse when the cosmic alignment makes such work possible. He approached the dais, gesturing for Eleanor to follow. Despite every instinct screaming at her to flee, she forced herself forward. Up close, the barrier hummed with power she could feel against her skin, like static electricity. Each ritual requires a catalyst, a being with special properties in their blood, someone whose very essence can strengthen the spell. Vlad turned to her, his expression solemn. Once in 1,000 years, a human is born with perfect resonance, a genetic pattern that mirrors the frequency of the barrier itself. You are such a being, Eleanor. And what happens to these catalysts? She asked, though Elisabetta had already given her the answer. Vlad's hesitation confirmed her fears before he spoke. Their essence becomes part of the barrier. Their consciousness transcends physical form. You mean it's destroyed? Eleanor said flatly. Transformed, he countered, elevated to something beyond human comprehension, but still not their own. Eleanor took a step back. You brought me here to be consumed by this spell. Vlad's expression darkened with genuine regret. I brought you here to save countless lives. If the barrier fails completely, the void will expand, consuming not just this castle or this country, but eventually the entire world. Billions will suffer fates worse than death. He reached for her hand, his touch cooler than human, but not unpleasant. I did not choose this burden for you, Eleanor. Fate did. Your blood calls to the magic that cannot be changed. Eleanor's mind raced. Everything Elisabetta had told her aligned with Vlad's explanation, yet she sensed he was still withholding something crucial. She glanced at the void, then back at him. Why do you need me specifically? You had a wife, Elisabetta. Her portrait shows we share a remarkable resemblance. Was she also a catalyst? A flash of something, pain, guilt, crossed Vlad's face. Elisabetta was different. Her sacrifice was meant to seal the breach permanently, but something went wrong. The ritual was incomplete. What happened? Eleanor pressed. She hesitated at the critical moment, Vlad admitted reluctantly. Her will faltered, and instead of closing the breach, the spell trapped her between states, neither fully sacrificed nor fully present. Her essence has remained in a kind of limbo ever since, bound to Black Crag, but unable to complete the ritual. The dagger felt suddenly heavier against Eleanor's leg. And you never tried to free her. To do so would destabilize the barrier entirely, Vlad said with finality. Her partial sacrifice has helped maintain it these 5 centuries, but the strain grows. The Fetch's appearance tonight is proof that the boundary weakens. Without a complete ritual during tomorrow's eclipse, all will be lost. He guided her away from the dais, back toward the obsidian doors. You should rest. Tomorrow will require all your strength. And if I refuse? Eleanor asked quietly as they exited the east wing. Vlad stopped, turning to face her with an expression of infinite sadness. Then I will not force you. The choice must be yours, freely made, or the ritual fails. But know this. Refusing means condemning every living thing on earth to horrors beyond imagining. The weight of his words followed Eleanor like a shadow as he escorted her back to her chambers. At the door, he paused. Despite how it may seem, I take no pleasure in this, Eleanor. If there were any other way— He trailed off, then straightened. A servant will wake you before dawn. The eclipse begins at midday. With that, he left her alone with her thoughts and the hidden dagger, a weapon that might free Elisabetta or doom the world, depending on whose truth she chose to believe. Sleep eluded Eleanor entirely. She paced her chamber, weighing her options, the crystal dagger now lying exposed on her bed. Its faceted blade caught moonlight from the window, refracting it into patterns that seemed to form and dissolve like living things. Near dawn, she came to a decision. She would return to the space between worlds and speak with Elisabetta once more, before sacrificing herself or allowing another to take her place. She needed the complete truth, whatever it might be. As the first pale light appeared on the horizon, Eleanor grasped the dagger and whispered, "Show me the way." The crystal blade pulsed with inner light, and Eleanor felt a tugging sensation, as if the dagger itself were pulling her toward the door. She followed its guidance through corridors that seemed to shift and change around her, ultimately leading her not to the sanctuary beneath the library, but to an ancient spiral staircase she had never seen before. The stairs descended into darkness far deeper than seemed possible within the castle's foundations. As she climbed down, step by careful step, Eleanor felt the air grow colder and heavier with each breath. At the bottom, a single arch opened into a cavern, illuminated by the same eerie blue light she had seen in Elisabetta's domain. But this was not the chamber she had visited before. This space was vast and rough-hewn, its walls covered in elaborate frescoes depicting scenes of cosmic horror, the void expanding, consuming worlds, transforming living beings into twisted abominations. And at the center stood an altar of black stone, above which floated a sphere of darkness identical to what she had seen in the East Wing. Before it stood Elisabetta, more solid now than when Eleanor had seen her last, her hands raised toward the hovering void, chanting in a language that hurt Eleanor's ears. Around her feet, drawn in what looked horribly like blood, was the same symbol from the book and the obsidian doors. Eleanor gasped, and Elisabetta whirled to face her, surprise and then calculation flashing across her familiar features. "You've come earlier than I expected," she said, lowering her hands. The floating darkness pulsed as if in response. "Have you decided to help me?" Eleanor gripped the dagger tightly, suddenly unsure. "I came for the truth. What is this place? What are you really doing?" Elisabetta's expression hardened, becoming less human by the second. "Clever girl. I had hoped to complete the preparations before you discovered this." She gestured toward the void sphere. "This is a seed of the outer realm, carefully cultivated these past centuries. When the eclipse reaches totality, I will use it to corrupt the ritual, opening the way for my true masters." "You serve the outer beings," Eleanor whispered in horror. "You're not trying to save the world. You're trying to destroy it." "Not destroy," Elisabetta corrected with a terrible smile. "Transform. Remake it into something glorious and strange. And you, with your catalytic blood, are the key that will unlock the final door." She extended her hand, her form shifting subtly to become more like Eleanor's reflection, a mirror image designed to inspire trust. "Join me willingly, and you will become a goddess in the new world. Resist, and I will take what I need by force." The dagger trembled in Eleanor's grasp as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. She had nearly freed the very entity plotting the world's destruction, all because of half-truths wrapped in familiar faces. But something still didn't make sense. "If you're powerful enough to maintain this space, to create this seed," Eleanor said, playing for time as she backed toward the stairs, "why do you need me to free you at all?" Elisabetta's smile turned cruel. "Because I am still bound by Vlad's magic, trapped between worlds. The dagger you hold is the only thing capable of severing those bonds. Once free, with your blood added to my power, nothing will stop the coming transformation." She lunged forward with inhuman speed, fingers extended like claws toward Eleanor's throat. Without thinking, Eleanor raised the crystal dagger defensively. The blade sliced through Elisabetta's outstretched hand, not passing through as it might through a ghost, but meeting solid resistance. Elisabetta screamed, a sound no human throat could produce. Where the dagger had cut her, her flesh did not bleed but unraveled, coming apart in strands of darkness that writhed like living things. She clutched the injury to her chest, her form flickering between the image of Eleanor and something far less human. "You cannot stop what is coming," she hissed, her voice distorting. "Even if you run to Vlad now, it's too late. The seed is planted. The eclipse approaches. All paths lead to the same end." Eleanor backed away toward the stairs, the dagger held before her like a talisman. "We'll see about that." She turned and fled up the spiral staircase, the inhuman howls of Elisabetta's rage following her like a physical force. The crystal dagger glowed brighter with each step, illuminating her way through the twisting passages of Blackcrag. She had to find Vlad, had to warn him about Elisabetta's true nature and the corrupted seed waiting to poison the ritual. The fate of everything now hinged on whether she could reach him before the eclipse began, and whether, after all the deceptions, she could convince him to trust her. As she raced through the castle, dawn broke fully over the mountains, painting the sky in colors that seemed too beautiful for a day that might end in cosmic horror. In the distance, the edge of the sun already appeared slightly dimmed, the first hint of the coming eclipse. Time was running out. Eleanor's lungs burned as she raced through the labyrinthine corridors of Castle Blackcrag, the crystal dagger clutched tightly in her hand, its glow pulsating in time with her frantic heartbeat. Behind her, she could feel the malevolent presence of Elisabetta, or whatever entity had been masquerading as Vlad's wife, pursuing her through the castle's shifting architecture. The sky outside the tall windows was changing rapidly, the sun's light growing noticeably dimmer as the moon began its slow crawl across its face. The eclipse was beginning, and with it, the moment of ultimate decision approached. "Vlad!" Eleanor called out, her voice echoing through the empty halls. "Where are you?" She burst into the great hall, momentarily disoriented as she tried to determine which way would lead to the east wing. The ritual would take place there, at the heart of the Void Breach. She was certain of it. But Castle Blackcrag seemed determined to confuse her, corridors appearing where none had been before, familiar landmarks suddenly missing. "He cannot hear you," came a voice that was at once familiar and utterly alien. Eleanor whirled around to find Elisabetta standing in the doorway she had just passed through, her form flickering between Eleanor's mirror image and something grotesque. A silhouette composed of writhing shadows, with too many limbs and eyes that burned like dying stars. "The Guardian prepares the ritual circle," Elisabetta continued, her mouth not quite moving in time with her words. "He believes he fights to save your world, never suspecting that his beloved wife has been working against him for centuries." She laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "Love is such a useful weakness." Eleanor backed away, raising the crystal dagger. "What are you?" "You're not Elisabetta." "I wear what remains of her, yes," the creature admitted, advancing slowly. "She resisted us initially, but 500 years is a long time to maintain one's integrity. What began as whispers from beyond the void became conversation, then communion, then possession. Now, there is more of us than her." A cold realization washed over Eleanor. "The fetches last night, they weren't trying to breach the castle. They were serving you. Clever girl. They brought the final components needed for our ritual. The Guardian was so concerned about protecting you from external threats. He never thought to look within." Eleanor felt the wall at her back and realized she had run out of room to retreat. The false Elisabetta was mere steps away now, her hand, partly human, partly something composed of living shadow, outstretched. "Give me the dagger, Eleanor. You were right to question the Guardian's intentions. He would indeed sacrifice you to seal the breach. Join us instead. When the void consumes this reality, you could rule beside us as a goddess." For a moment Eleanor hesitated. Death awaited her either way, absorption into the barrier or consumption by the void. But then she remembered the book in the sanctuary, its warning about the consequences of failure. Entire worlds devoured, billions suffering fates worse than death. Whatever Vlad intended for her, it couldn't be worse than that. "No," Eleanor said firmly, tightening her grip on the dagger. "I don't believe you. If Vlad meant to sacrifice me without consent, why tell me anything at all? Why not simply force me into the ritual unprepared?" The creature's expression twisted with frustration. "Because the ritual requires willing participation, a conscious choice to sacrifice. That is its weakness and its strength. But it matters not. The eclipse progresses. Soon, with or without your cooperation, the way will open." With inhuman speed, the false Elisabetta lunged for Eleanor, clawed fingers aiming for her throat. Eleanor reacted instinctively, slashing with the crystal dagger. The blade passed through the creature's arm, leaving a wound that leaked not blood, but a viscous darkness that hissed when it touched the floor. The creature shrieked in pain and rage, its form destabilizing further. Eleanor seized the opportunity and ducked past it, running toward where she believed the east wing lay. The dagger in her hand pulsed brighter, seeming to tug her in a specific direction. She followed its guidance, trusting it more than her own sense of the castle's layout. As she ran, Eleanor felt the air growing heavier, charged with energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. The eclipse must be nearing totality. She had little time left. The obsidian doors of the east wing appeared before her suddenly, as if the castle itself had finally decided to aid her. They stood open, revealing the vast chamber beyond, now transformed by elaborate preparations for the ritual. The dais at the center now bore a complex series of concentric circles, inscribed with symbols that glowed with a blue-white light, similar to that in Elisabetta's underground chamber. The barrier containing the void fragment appeared thinner, the darkness within more active, reaching tendrils pressing against its magical constraints. And there, completing the final inscriptions, was Vlad. He looked up as she entered, surprise and then relief washing over his features. "Eleanor, where have you been? The servants reported you missing." He broke off, eyes widening as he took in her disheveled appearance and the glowing crystal dagger in her hand. "What is that weapon? Where did you get it?" "There's no time," Eleanor gasped, rushing toward him. "Elisabetta, or something wearing her form, has been corrupting your ritual. She serves the outer beings. She plans to use the eclipse to open the way for them, not seal it." Vlad's expression darkened with confusion and then dawning horror. "Elisabetta? But that's impossible. Her essence is bound within the barrier." "Not all of it," came the voice of the false Elisabetta from the chamber entrance. Her form had degraded further, now barely maintaining a human appearance. Shadows writhed around her like a cloak of living darkness, and her eyes burned with an otherworldly light. "I've been preparing for this moment for 5 centuries, my love. Did you truly believe I would peacefully accept the fate you condemned me to?" Vlad moved protectively in front of Eleanor. "What are you? You cannot be my wife." "Oh, but I am. What's left of her, at least." The creature advanced into the chamber, the shadows around it expanding, dimming the magical lights. "She hated you at the end, you know. When she realized you meant to sacrifice her, that your love meant less than your duty, that hatred was the crack through which we first whispered to her." Vlad's face contorted with anguish. "I never wanted to sacrifice her. The ritual was meant for us both, a joining of essences to create a permanent guardian for the breach. But something interfered at the critical moment." His eyes widened with sudden understanding. "It was you. You corrupted the spell from within her." "And now history repeats itself," the false Elisabetta said, gesturing toward Eleanor. "Another innocent girl, another sacrifice. Except this time, the outcome will be different. The void will not be contained. It will expand, consuming everything." Outside, the light dimmed further as the moon covered more of the sun. Through the domed ceiling, Eleanor could see the eclipse progressing, the corona of the sun beginning to form a ring of fire around the moon's dark silhouette. The barrier around the void fragment pulsed in response, weakening with each passing second. Vlad grabbed Eleanor's arm, pulling her toward the dais. The ritual must proceed immediately. It's our only chance to stop her. Wait! Eleanor resisted, holding up the crystal dagger. This weapon hurts her. It can sever the bonds that tie her to this world. If we can banish her before completing the ritual... The dagger is a catalyst key, Vlad said with surprise, recognizing it now. It was lost centuries ago, a tool meant to focus the energies of the willing sacrifice. But yes, it could also sever Elisabetta's corrupted essence from our realm. The question is whether we can reach her with it. As if in answer, the false Elisabetta raised her arms, and the shadows surrounding her coalesced into tentacle-like appendages that shot toward them with terrifying speed. Vlad shouted a word in a language Eleanor didn't recognize, and a barrier of blue-white light sprang up around them, deflecting the shadow tentacles. "My power wanes with the approaching totality," Vlad warned. "I cannot maintain this protection for long." Eleanor looked at the dagger, then at the ritual circle, and finally at the eclipse visible through the domed ceiling. An idea formed in her mind. Dangerous, perhaps suicidal, but possibly their only chance. "The ritual requires a willing sacrifice," she said slowly, "one who chooses to surrender their essence to strengthen the barrier." "Yes," Vlad confirmed, strain evident in his voice as he maintained their magical protection. "But we cannot complete it while she interferes. Her corruption will twist the energies, opening the way for the void rather than sealing it." "What if there were two sacrifices?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "One to eliminate her threat and one to seal the breach." Vlad's eyes widened with understanding, then darkened with refusal. "No! I will not allow you to—" "Not me," Eleanor interrupted. "You." Silence fell between them, broken only by the false Elisabetta's inhuman screeching as she continued to assault their barrier. "You said the original ritual was meant for both of you," Eleanor continued urgently. "A joining of essences. You've maintained the barrier alone for 5 centuries, fighting a battle you couldn't possibly win. Let me take your place as guardian, and you use the dagger to sever Elisabetta's corrupted essence from our world." "Such a severing would require being in direct contact with her," Vlad said grimly. "It would be suicide, but it would work." He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Theoretically, yes. The dagger would sever her connection to our reality, banishing whatever outer influence has corrupted her. But Eleanor, I cannot ask you to—" "You're not asking," she said firmly. "I'm choosing. Isn't that what the ritual requires? A free choice." The protective barrier around them flickered as another tendril of shadow struck it. Through the domed ceiling, Eleanor could see the eclipse nearing totality, the sun's disk almost completely covered. Vlad studied her face, searching for any sign of doubt or fear. Finding none, he nodded solemnly. "Very well, but we must act quickly. The moment of totality approaches." He guided her to the center of the ritual circle, positioning her at the exact focal point of the concentric symbols. The catalyst key, the dagger, must be used at the precise moment of total eclipse. I will engage Elisabetta, using the dagger to sever her corrupted essence. You must focus your will on the barrier, offering yourself as its new guardian. "How will I know what to do?" Eleanor asked, suddenly uncertain. Vlad's expression softened. "The ritual will guide you. Open yourself to it. Accept its purpose. The rest will follow naturally." He took her hands in his, the touch intimate despite the dire circumstances. "Eleanor Blackwood, I regret that fate brought you to this moment. Know that your sacrifice will not be forgotten." "Nor will yours," she replied softly. For a brief moment, something passed between them. An understanding. Perhaps even the beginning of what might have become love in another lifetime. Then Vlad released her hands and turned to face the corrupted Elisabetta, the crystal dagger gleaming in his grip. With a word of power, he dropped their protective barrier and charged toward his former wife. The false Elisabetta shrieked in triumph, shadow tendrils whipping toward him, but Vlad moved with supernatural speed, dodging the worst of the assault, though several tendrils scored deep wounds across his body. As the combatants engaged, Eleanor closed her eyes and focused on the ritual circle beneath her feet. She could feel it responding to her presence, the symbols pulsing with energy that rose up through her body like electricity. The sensation wasn't painful, but transformative, as if every cell in her being was awakening to a greater purpose. Through the domed ceiling, the eclipse reached totality. The sun's corona formed a perfect ring of fire around the moon's black disk. At that precise moment, several things happened simultaneously. Vlad reached the false Elisabetta, driving the crystal dagger into her chest with all his remaining strength. "Forgive me, beloved," he whispered as the blade penetrated. The creature that had once been Elisabetta let out a scream that transcended human hearing, the sound vibrating at a frequency that shattered the glass in the dome above. Her form began to dissolve, the shadows that had sustained her unraveling like smoke in a high wind. But as she disintegrated, her tendrils wrapped around Vlad, dragging him with her into whatever abyss awaited. "Complete the ritual, Eleanor," he called out, his voice already fading. "Seal the breach." In the center of the ritual circle, Eleanor felt the barrier around the void fragment pulse once, twice, and then begin to collapse. The darkness within surged forward, eager to escape its centuries of confinement. Without conscious thought, Eleanor stepped forward and placed her hands directly against the failing barrier. "I choose this," she said clearly, her voice carrying with unexpected authority. "I choose to become the guardian. I choose to protect." The ritual responded to her declaration. The symbols on the floor blazed with blinding light, and Eleanor felt herself being drawn into the barrier, not physically, but essentially. Her consciousness expanded beyond her body, merging with the ancient magic that had held the void at bay for millennia. As her physical form remained standing in the circle, her awareness spread throughout Castle Blackcrag, connecting with every stone, every shadow, every secret passage. She could feel the castle's history flowing through her, the generations of guardians who had maintained the barrier, their knowledge and experiences becoming part of her own. And there, within that expanded awareness, she found something unexpected, a presence, familiar yet changed. "Vlad," she called out with her mind rather than her voice. "I am here," came his response, his consciousness somehow preserved within the magical matrix of the barrier. "Elisabetta is gone, truly gone. Her corrupted essence has been severed from our reality. But you remain," Eleanor said with wonder, "as do you, though not as we were before. We have become something new, together." Eleanor understood then the truth of the original ritual. Not a sacrifice of obliteration, but of transformation. Not an ending, but a beginning. Her physical body would eventually fade, but her essence would continue, joined with Vlad's in eternal guardianship of the boundary between worlds. Outside, the eclipse passed its moment of totality, and sunlight began to return to the world. Within the east wing, the barrier around the void fragment solidified, stronger than it had been in centuries. The darkness within raged against its confinement, but could find no weakness to exploit. Eleanor's body remained standing in the ritual circle, eyes open, but seeing beyond the physical realm. To any observer, she might have appeared like a statue, frozen in a moment of transcendence. But within the magical matrix of Castle Blackcrag, she and Vlad began the work of healing the damage done by centuries of corruption and deceit. Together, they would guard the boundary between worlds, not as captor and captive, nor as predator and prey, but as equals united by choice and purpose. And perhaps, in the eternity that stretched before them, they would discover that the sacrifice they had made was not an end to love, but its beginning. For in Castle Blackcrag, where darkness and light intertwined, where time flowed differently and magic permeated every stone, Two souls found in each other what they had both sought for so long. Not merely duty, but belonging. Not just purpose, but peace. The world would never know how close it had come to destruction, nor the price paid for its salvation. But in Ravenwood Village, stories would be told of the woodcutter's daughter who vanished into Castle Blackcrag and became something greater than human. A guardian spirit, a protector, a queen of shadows and light, who watched over the boundary between worlds with unwavering vigilance. And sometimes, on nights when the moon hung full and bright over the Carpathian Mountains, travelers would swear they saw two figures walking the battlements of the ancient castle. A woman with chestnut hair and a tall man with eyes like the spaces between stars, their hands clasped together as they kept their eternal watch over the realm between worlds.